Good day, and welcome to the third day of the 6th Around the World Conference. My name is Jeffrey Rockwell. I'm talking to you from Edmonton, Alberta. And we here at the University of Alberta would like to respectfully acknowledge that we're situated on Treaty 6 territory, traditional lands of First Nations and Métis people. Today's topic is Green Philosophies, redefining our sustainable past and future. Please feel free to ask questions on the website aroundtheworld.ualberta.ca. You'll find if you go there and you just scroll down, that's where the live video is. You scroll down, there's a place to write comments and questions. We will make sure that we get the questions to the people who are talking. They may not answer right then, but we'll try to make sure that we get you an answer. You can also tweet. We have the hashtag ATW2018, which we discovered was used a couple months ago by the American Trombone Workshop. So we're sharing it, and I think that suits well. I want to remind you also that the Office of Sustainability, if you're interested in these types of electronic conferences, the Office of Sustainability has created a pamphlet. This is to some extent specific to the University of Alberta, but it has general advice too, and you can download a PDF from their website. And at this point, I'd like to introduce the chair of this session, Dr. Shannon Stunden-Bower, Assistant Professor in History and Classics. Over to you.
Thanks, Jeffrey. It's such a pleasure to be here today as part of this really important conference in what I'm sure promises to be a really engaging and enlightening session on sustainability, past, present, and future. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that the University of Alberta, where we are here today, those of us in person, sits in Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of First Nations and Métis people. We're talking about nations including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwa, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others. I'd also like to invite those of you who are following from parts further afield to take a moment to reflect on the Indigenous territories in which you may be situated today. Grounding ourselves in that way is really important in relation to the themes and processes we're talking about here today, in my view. Without further ado, I'd like to move into the substantive part of our session today, and I'll offer an introduction for our first speaker, who will be Dr. Petra Dolata, who is an associate professor and Canada Research Chair in the History of Energy at the University of Calgary. She holds a master's degree in American Studies, and she's also received her PhD in International Relations with a study on U.S.-German energy relations through the mid-20th century. Dr. Dolata wears a number of really interesting hats. For instance, she's the co-convener of Energy in Society, a working group in the Calgary Institute for the Humanities, and she's also a senior research associate with the European Centre for Energy and Resource Security at King's College, London. Her current research focuses on European and North American energy history after 1945, as well as the history and politics of the Canadian and circumpolar Arctic. And I'm really looking forward to what she has to say.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for this kind introduction. And I will use my 15 to 20 minutes to talk as a historian about sustainability. But I should also say that my background is in North American history, but also I'm a German. So there will be sort of a lot of reference to German discussions on sustainability or Nachhaltigkeit, because I think that helps us somehow reflect on the history of the term. So I will start a presentation now, and hopefully we can go from there. So the title of my presentation is Sustainability in the Anthropocene, and I will explain why I chose those two sort of very trendy words, if you will, to talk about the history of a concept of sustainability. Now, the three things that I want to highlight in the short time that I have is, first of all, to remind ourselves that sustainability is not an essentialist concept, and it needs to be historicized. We need to understand when it has been coined, for what reasons, and how it has taken on very different meanings as we progress in time, but also as we may look towards different regions in the world. Secondly, I think we also should be very aware of the fact that sustainability and the many uses and possibly overuses of the term sustainability have really made it into a normative concept, in the sense that everyone would agree that sustainability is a good thing. Now, as a historian, you always, of course, want to understand whether that is really the case and what that says about the term itself. It also reminds us that a lot of what is encapsulated in the term has to do with responsible behavior by societies, by governments, by states, but also by corporations. I encourage you to just look around you and see how many companies nowadays will actually advertise any of their products by adding the term sustainable or sustainability to it. Third, I want to also then talk about the very specific political meanings and uses of the term sustainability, as I think that is at the heart of the problem in terms of its current overuse, but also in understanding its normative dimensions. So let me start with when most of us historians agree we think we hear for the first time about sustainability as a specific concept. And that is normally when we go back to a German inspector of mines in Saxony in the late 17th, early 18th century, Hans Carl von Carlowitz. And you can see here on the left, this is a page out of his publication. And essentially, he was someone who looked into forestry, but for a very specific region. At this time, Saxony was very prominent in terms of mining of silver, mining of tin, mining of lead. And just at the end of the 30 Years' War in Europe, these activities picked up again. But the problem is, to get, of course, any of these resources out of the ore, you need a lot of wood. So on the right-hand side, you actually see an example of the usage of wood in a tin mine. So the problem was that you were using too much of the forest wood in order to sustain some economic revenue. And so what Hans Carl von Carlowitz did is to think about how to manage forests in order to allow to have a constant supply of wood to then allow the mining of silver, tin, and lead. Now, this is very important because we understand, first of all, that the historical concept of sustainability was really related to forestry, but also it was something that was performed through a publication, his book, that talked about it, but also certain acts that related to mining activities. And it was something that actually came from above. This was the Principality of Saxony really worrying about its revenue income from these activities, and this was a management tool. So if we look at his original publication, which is called the Silvicultura Economica, and I took the German passage out here for those of you who are maybe listening elsewhere and will be able to follow, and I will highlight the two important words that are in here. So essentially, this is an argument about if we want to avoid poverty and in the population of Saxony, we cannot use too much of the wood. We have to try and manage this. And so if you see here, there are two words that I've highlighted: conservation and nachhaltende. Nachhaltigkeit is the German word for sustainability. What does that tell us? I think it shows the two aspects that we always look at when we look at sustainability. The one has to do, we somehow link natural resources and economy, in this case through this concept of conservation. But more important is probably this. the idea of nachhaltig, the idea of linking the present and the future. So in its original context, sustainability already had these two kind of components. Why is this important? Well, on the one hand, of course, conservationism is something that, particularly in North America, developed in two very sort of distinct ways. The one is, and that's when we think of John Muir, who you can see here in this image, of course, looking at conservation as the sustainable use of natural resources for the benefit of the people. But in his case, not for the economic benefit, but for an aesthetic and recreational benefit. Now, at the same time, in North America, around the 1930s, we also have discussions that look at how to conserve oil, which was in abundance because of large finds of oil in East Texas in 1930. There were now talks about how do we ensure that we have an economically viable management of resources so that we as corporations still receive a lot of profit for it. And so this is where we then talk about resource economics and conservation of oil through regulation. So the Texas Railroad Commission, or also we see the same things in the province of Alberta, regulatory bodies that decide that only on so many days oil can be drilled or only to a certain amount. So interestingly, early on in the 20th century, we do have this connection of resources and economics in terms of sustaining and conserving. The other one, and that's of course the one that brings us to the current discussion, is this linkage of present and the future. Now, what does this actually imply? And I think it's easy to forget that this is about creating some sort of solidarity between generations. It is about managing a scarcity. That's the underlying assumption here. It is almost, in the traditional sense, being economical with resources. All of this means, of course, that you have certain assumptions about the availability of resources and the finiteness of these resources. We all find this encapsulated in the famous Brundtland report, which we normally see, of course, as bringing into the discussion the term of sustainable development, where sustainable development is defined as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So this has the idea of the solidarity between generations. Now, what I want to discuss, though, is that we need to really place this Brundtland report in a larger history of, if you will, sort of the thinking about the end of the boom, which starts in the late 1960s and is very prominent in the 1970s. So this is my contribution in terms of historicizing the concept even further. Now, we have a number of publications in the 60s and 70s, whether it's Rachel Carson's Silent Spring that talks about environmental degradation. We have Paul Ehrlich's The Population Bomb, which talks about, in a Malthusian sense, the limits to global resources because of population growth. And then, of course, we have the 1972 Club of Rome publication on the limits of growth. These were very prominent publications that were widely discussed. And of course, what they reflected is that after the prosperous 1950s and 1960s in the Western world, people were really realizing scarcity, problems with progress, continuous progress. So there was a rethinking process. Of course, part of it has to do with a number of environmental issues, but also things like, for the first time with the Apollo mission, we were actually able to see our planet Earth. And people realized the preciousness of the blue planet, but also the possible degradation. This is then why, of course, we have the first Earth Day in the 1970s. So a lot of discussions about air pollution and other environmental issues. But we also have economic crisis. So this is where we actually have the confluence of environmental awareness plus environmental crisis. We have the energy crisis. We have almost the disapproval of Keynesian economics, where we have both stagnation and inflation, stagflation, something that people didn't expect. We also have very specific policies in the United States, where the end of the gold convertibility of the US dollar is announced by Nixon, where exchange rates are no longer fixed. So essentially, we really realize that international economy is coming to a grind. However, we should always remember that this is a very specific historical and Western experience. So this idea to shift from optimism about the future and expectations of uninterrupted economic growth and rise in the standard of living to a more pragmatic or even more pessimistic view of the future. And this is sort of what facilitates our discussion about sustainability. There is an existing narrative of crisis in the 1970s. There is search for new narratives of progress and sustainability at the same time. So if we compare Karlowitz's very early definition of Nachhaltigkeit in the early 18th century and then the discussion of the 1970s, we can see a couple of similarities and differences. The similarities is that in both cases, we actually have a narrative of crisis and catastrophe. In the early 18th century in Saxony, that was about the sort of catastrophe of deforestation. We also have discussion about scientific solutions to crisis, technological or management solutions to crisis. All these discussions, and I think that's very important for what I will say towards the end, is these are discussions within established political systems. And also the solutions are considered within those political systems. They're not revolutionary. They're not questioning, for example, existing economic regimes in the 18th century or in the 1970s. They're very much top down. And one of the things as an energy historian, which is very important to note, is that this is a scarcity within apologies, it actually has to be switched around. So this should read organic energy regime. So this is an energy regime that's based on organic material, wood, wind, water, and these kind of things. And we know as energy historians that organic energy regimes are very limited in terms of what the land can give. Now, if we compare that to the 1970s, where we have moved to a mineral energy regime based on hydrocarbons and fossil fuels, that has actually had witnessed exponential growth of energy, and energy that was decoupled, if you will, from the land. So what this means is that Karlowitz could visibly see what is happening to his environment. In the 1970s, some of it is not necessarily as visible and certainly not as localized as it was under Karlowitz. Also, in Karlowitz's case, things were a lot less complex. They were not interconnected. They were not as global. So I think one of the things to understand as we look at the way that sustainability becomes an important topic in the 1970s is that we also need to start thinking about what about those areas that are not within certain jurisdictions that cannot be handled through management top down. So this brings us, for example, to what Jared Harden has discussed in terms of the tragedy of the commons. What about those areas, the oceans, the space, that are not necessarily regulated by these political systems? But also it brings in the question of historical responsibility, the sheer scale of environmental impact that humans have, and the complexity and the global nature of it brings in this idea of the Anthropocene, a geological time that really sees how humans impact the earth as geology. So the question then remains is, why did we add the development to sustainability in terms of the Brundtland Commission? And I think it's also very specific to the 1970s because of the energy crisis and because of a number of other developments in the developing world. There were a lot of discussions between the so-called North and South in the 1970s, driven by the United Nations, driven by the Group of 77, which are essentially developing countries within the United Nations, founded as a group in the 1960s, and the UN Declaration for the Establishment of a New International Economic Order, which really was developing countries pushing for level playing fields in terms of global trade. And then we also have the Paris Conference on the International Economic Cooperation, which was not very successful, but which really brought together the issues about resources and the scarcity of resources, although people would argue, of course, it had a lot more to do with the pricing than with the scarcity, and of course, developmental goals. And this explains why, why we actually see a very strong emphasis on development within sustainability, something that is with us today. I think, though, and this is what I would like to bring in the issue also of politics here, is that understanding the concept and the way it has developed ever since the Brundtland Commission is not possible without understanding where the time it came out of, the 1970s. And I would like to remind us as well is that there were alternative ways of talking about sustainability. And one of them was, if we take this example of the example of the Toronto Recycling Action Committee in the 1970s. Now, some of you, especially in Canada, but elsewhere, may know about the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle, which really speaks towards, of course, aiming for efficiency and sustainability in our daily behavior. But interestingly, the original slogan of the Toronto Recycling Action Committee was refuse, reuse, recycle. And I point this out because it's easy to forget that during the 70s, a number of alternatives that really addressed that linkage between resources and the environment, that addressed present and future, was to question the actual political and economic system. Of course, refuse entails that we don't buy, that we don't participate as much as consumers. So some of these groups were actually radically questioning the underlying capital system that we had here. And sort of that is a lot more a political discussion that we witnessed. And that brings us to where we are today in discussions about the Anthropocene as possibly a capitalocene. So this idea of should we get away of the development part in terms of sustainability and rethink entirely the political and economic system that underlines the very specific historical discussions on sustainability that come out of the 1970s and 1980s. And as a last sort of food for thought, this is what we sometimes saw in the 60s and 70s in the northern parts of Canada, in Arctic Canada. But of course, the question was, is sustainable development yet another Western settler concept that is used to form our subsistence economy into a way that we fit into the global economic system, something that we also see sometimes questioning in terms of environmental stewardship. So I think, and this is where I would like to finish off, we should be reminded that there is a specific history to the term. It's a very Western history to the term, and quite possibly the term itself, because it's so overused for so many reasons, has lost the kind of activist and political significance that it used to have. Thank you.
It was wonderful. I'm sure that certainly myself, and I'm sure everybody watching, is really looking forward to when we take questions following the 2 talks and hopefully knit some of these ideas together a bit more thoroughly. So thank you. And with that, we'll turn to our second presenter in this session. Dr. Howard Nye is an associate professor of philosophy at the University of Alberta. He works primarily in the areas of normative ethics, practical ethics, and meta-ethics, and has related interests in political philosophy, the philosophy of mind, and decision theory. Much of Dr. Nye's current research investigates challenges to the common assumption that life is less of a morally important benefit to beings who lack the intellectual abilities of typical human adults. Dr. Nye.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. Thanks for the great talk to the last speaker. So this talk is titled "Why Be Sustainable," but as you'll see, I don't think I'm putting much stock in the concept of sustainability. I'm really going to be talking primarily about climate mitigation activity, greenhouse gas mitigation activities, and also not dumping polluting waste and using lots of land and using lots of water. So yeah, so this is a talk in the general area of the ethics of collective action. So I think a question that a lot of individuals ask themselves when it comes to, say, being sustainable or preventing environmental degradation, preventing greenhouse gas emissions, minimizing land use, water use, is why should we try to do these things to improve the environment when it can seem that the effects of our acts are too small to make a difference? So here's Walterson and Armstrong sort of trying to push this point in a 2005 paper. So climate change, Sin and Armstrong claims, occurs on such a massive scale that my individual driving of a car makes no difference to the well-being of anyone. And this, I think, taps into a very general ethical problem about collective action, which is theoretically very important. But I think that this one in particular is also practically very important. So you can certainly see say certain sorts of right-wing politicians claiming that, hey, why should we do anything about climate change when we're just one country or we're just one province and India and China are still polluting. But unfortunately, I think you can even see it on the left. You hear individuals claim, well, why, it's a waste of time to try to minimize my own greenhouse gas emissions. I should wait for the government to do something about it. Or I think even worse, we shouldn't, it's a waste of time for us to do anything while there's still private ownership of assets. We should wait for some pie-in-the-sky communist revolution that no one except a few economically illiterate academics wants anyway. I hope I haven't been hearing things like that throughout the rest of this conference, but I was worried that some things were dangerously close. So I think it's very important to get clear about the ethical issues here and why it is that we individuals should be taking action. And I don't mean to minimize political action. I mean, part of this is going to be why we should take political action, but not just political action, why we should do things like minimize flying and have this conference instead of an in-person conference. So the approach I'm going to be defending we might broadly call the expected consequences approach. So in these cases where our acts are together collectively harmful, our individual acts do in fact have a small chance of causing a great deal of harm. And the moral importance of avoiding this risk of harm to others outweighs the possible benefits to us of performing these acts. So this line of reasoning, I think it's extremely plausible. It comes out of, I think, just the centrally correct lesson of standard decision theory, which is when we're unsure of the outcomes of an act, we should weigh against it what we might call its expected harms or each of the possible bad outcomes of the act in proportion to both their badness and how likely they are. And we should weigh in favor of the act its expected benefits or each of its possible good outcomes in proportion to both their goodness and how likely they are. And we should perform the act which gives us the best balance of expected benefits over expected harms. So I think this is just a clearly responsible way of reasoning that gives adequate ethical importance to both the likelihood of things and their goodness and their badness. And it really just sort of implements the core ethical idea, which I think is absolutely correct in, say, and nothing's more clearly correct in ethics, I think, than this, of the principle of non-maleficence. An act harming others is a reason not to perform it, proportional in strength to the degree of harm in question, and an act benefiting others is a reason to perform it, proportional in strength to the degree of benefit in question. And I think standard decision theory, it already gives us a very plausible explanation of why it's morally important not to do various things that have a small chance of having a great deal of harm, such as why it would be wrong to bounce a ball around a nuclear launch button, why it would be wrong to shoot into an occupied building for target practice, and why it's wrong to speed in residential areas when you're late for work, because although these things have a small chance of causing harm, the harm would be enormous if that harm were to occur. So I think this is a great approach. I should mention, I think that it's consistent with but does not entail the ethical theory known as act consequentialism, according to which we should perform the act with the best consequences regardless of how we cause those consequences. So unfortunately, I think in the literature, the discussion of the expected consequences approach is often conflated with just act consequentialism, and that's a mistake, because while act consequentialism has a lot of virtues, and you should certainly, I think, take the expected consequence approach if you are an act consequentialist, it in no way, the expected consequence approach in no way presupposes this controversial view of act consequentialism. And indeed, it's consistent with the common view that reasons of non-maleficence or expected harms are much stronger than reasons of beneficence or expected benefits. I think this is actually important for communicating with many individuals who hold this view. So for example, maybe you don't owe the global poor most of your income. Certainly a lot of individuals who are not super familiar with all the arguments for strong duties of beneficence would think that. But I think it can still be very clearly right when you're communicating with these individuals that, look, you do owe it to the global poor that you not risk killing them, especially for personal convenience. That's just not the sort of thing that a decent civilized society does when it has real alternatives to risking this lethal harm. Okay, so to see how the expected consequences approach can kind of work in these collective action cases, take one of the most straightforward examples, which would be that of voting in a democratic election. So here's sort of a stylized voting case, which I've slightly adapted from a Simpsons episode. So it's revealed that one of the majority party candidates running for president of the United States is an evil alien who will enslave and torture everyone in the country if and only if he wins the election. Now here's the break from the Simpsons. In this case, the other candidate's just a typical human who would maintain the status quo, right? So King has, however, rigged the voting booths to pay out $50 to everyone who votes for him. So the question, should you vote for King? Well, if your vote makes no difference one way or the other, why not, vote for King and take the $50 if he's going to win or lose anyway? Well, here's the thing. If you're, so just to use some numbers that I have estimates of, if you're in a swing state in a closely contested presidential election, you have something like a 1 in 60 million chance of deciding the election, of your vote being decisive and the candidate winning by one vote or preventing a tie. So if that's right, then the expected value of voting for King is, well, the benefit to you of $50 being the expected benefit, and the expected harm, though, is the average harm to you as citizen times the number of U.S. citizens times 1 over 60 million, right? That's the probability that you're going to cause that harm. And actually, the expected harms outweigh the expected benefits. You can see if the average harm to U.S. citizen is greater than 1/5 of the benefit to you of $50. And that's very obvious. It's so overwhelmingly true, right? So clearly the harm of being enslaved and tortured is astronomically greater than the benefit to you of $10. So the expected consequences approach will just straightforwardly say, look, you can't vote for King. Indeed, given comparable sorts of expected benefits of swinging the other way, you got to go out and vote for the other candidate. And you can see that, these numbers are so astronomically lopsided that even if the chance of deciding the election is much less than 1 in 60 million, this kind of calculation is still going to work out in favor of voting. And if you don't think that an election can be decided by a single vote, the U.S. has news for you. There was the very real case of the 94th District in Virginia, which, was, well, it went on a single vote. If one more Democrat had voted for the Democratic candidate, that candidate would have won, and control of the House would have not gone to the Republicans. But it was exactly tied in votes. So in fact, the election was decided by a coin flip, and it went to the Republican. And you can think, so now the Republicans have control of the House, and you can think, well, because they have control of the House, that could make a huge political difference, right? To climate policy, to all sorts of things, right? So this can really happen, and I think it's a good account of why we do in fact have powerful moral reasons to go out and vote. Okay, so as Shelley Kagan points out, these voting cases are where the expected consequences approach works pretty straightforwardly. They're an instance of a more general approach. So the expected consequence approach works pretty straightforwardly for these cases like voting, or more generally what he calls triggering cases, where most acts that we're all performing might make no difference to an outcome, but one act, or really technically one cohort of acts, each member of which is strictly necessary to it, makes a great difference by crossing a threshold and triggering an important effect. So there's other kinds of really important examples of triggering cases in consumer ethics, which are environmentally highly relevant too. So for example, suppose that some number n of additional consumer purchases of chickens, this could be something like 10,000, it could be more, it could be less, it doesn't really matter, cause n more chickens to be tortured and killed for chicken production, which with, by the way, the use of much more grain, land, and water input and polluting waste than the vegan alternatives. Then by purchasing a chicken at the store, you have a 1 in n chance of causing n more chickens to be tortured and killed in a way that is extremely environmentally destructive, which has the same expected harm and is as important to avoid morally as torturing and killing one chicken and causing the attendant ecological damage for mere taste pleasure, right? So that's why it's very important. One of the best things we can do environmentally is to go vegan. That's one of the, of course for the chickens too, but that's one of the most manageable, biggest impact things most of us can do. So there's another really important triggering case. And in this case, you can see, unlike in the voting case, there's more than one ethically relevant threshold, right? So even if 10,000 have been ordered, you have a chance of rounding up the next 10,000, right, and causing harm that way. So John Broome, really importantly, has argued that there are other instances of emitting greenhouse gases besides buying animal products, which is actually a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. Very conservative estimates would say that at least 15% of all greenhouse gases come from animal agriculture. That actually uses a very low ball methane warming factor, so it's probably a good deal more than that, in fact. But other stuff, that you do to emit greenhouse gases, like especially for this conference, flying on planes, right, instead of having an e-conference, but also driving instead of riding your bike and taking public transit. These are also triggering cases with many shots at triggering harmful outcomes. So here's Broome putting it, I think, just beautifully. Greenhouse gas harms people and more general individuals in multifarious ways. Each of them is chancy to some extent. A particular storm will be harmful only if the water rises above the flood defenses. Each increase in the amount of greenhouse gas in the air slightly increases the quantity of rain, but will be a matter of chance whether the particular quantity of gas you emit this year will be enough to cause a flood on any particular occasion. Your emission increases the likelihood of a flood, but it might not actually cause any particular flood. But during the centuries that they are in the air, they will have the chance of causing harm on innumerable occasions. And in fact, Broome concludes, it is extraordinarily unlikely that your emissions will do no harm at all. Right? So that's something to think about. Even if that's not true, you can see how the expected consequence threshold or triggering case reasoning is going to work here. So what does this mean concretely? Well, Knowles in 2011 paper estimated that the expected harm from 1,840 metric tons of CO2 equivalent, that's actually the average, what he estimated is the average emissions from an average American citizen, is equivalent to the death and or severe suffering of 1 to 2 humans. So the average annual emissions, so that 1,840 metric tons is going to be expected on average to cause the death and or suffering of 1 to 2 humans. Right? So if we just take that lowball figure, for each human on Earth, and then that's only the humans, right? So what about the sentient non-human animals? Well, for each human on Earth, there's lowball estimates would say that there's at least 14 wild land vertebrates and 1,400 wild marine vertebrates. It's Tomless 2017. I'm using vertebrates because they're clearly sentient, clearly capable of being harmed and benefited in the same morally important sense as us. And these non-human animals are likely at least as vulnerable to climate change as the humans, probably a lot more. So this is a lowball way of reasoning if we take these ratios. So Hiller did these calculations, and he came out with the expected harm of of driving 25 miles instead of taking your bike and public transit is to ruin the afternoon of 1 human and plus probably the afternoon of 14 land vertebrates and 1,400 marine vertebrates, right? Again, lowball if we're just using the lowball figures. To put it more concretely for like this conference, the expected benefit of switching a conference with 184 attendees to an e-conference and mitigating 1 metric ton of CO2 per participant would be to save 8 years of human life, so comparable to saving the expected benefit maybe of saving the life of an older emeritus colleague or one's grandfather, and that's extremely morally important, right? And also the life of probably 1.4 land vertebrates and 140 marine vertebrates. So that's like saving your elderly grandfather and saving his dog and saving the 140 fish who live in the pond by their house. Very morally important stuff, right? And in fact, if you're looking more long term, if you don't switch, your conference to an e-conference. In 10 years, the conference would be expected to cost a full human life, plus the lives of 14 land vertebrates and 1,400 marine vertebrates. So that would be comparable to baby killing, or if, some philosophers don't think baby killing is that bad, maybe comparable to killing two 40-year-olds or something like that. So again, that's just with the low ball figures. So extremely powerful moral reasons, right, to stop doing this stuff, mitigate as much as we can, switch to e-conferencing, right? Okay, well, I think that's the right ethical approach, but let me, what I want to do is sort of consider and respond to a challenge to it. So standard applications of expected consequence, this expected consequence approach, assume that there's always a chance that our acts will determinately harm others, right? So I've said, there's this chance that if you do this, they'll be harmed, and if you didn't do it, they wouldn't have been harmed, right? It's been sort of depending on that. And there's two challenges, two ways of challenging this, both of which involve the possibility that our acts actually have metaphysically, that's a little jargony, effects where there's no fact of the matter about what the actual impact of our acts is. So the first, which I'm most worried about, are what Shelley Kagan calls apparent imperceptible difference cases. So these are cases where one's act seems certain to make no perceptible difference on anyone, but it is going to make one of these sort of undetectable differences to many individuals. So I unfortunately haven't been able to come up with a good environmental version of this case. Kagan tries to. Morgan Knapp and Goodman try to, but they weren't very convincing. So I'll just use the old-fashioned sort of harmless torture as one from Derek Parfit. So in this case, each of 1,000 torturers presses a button that has an imperceptible effect on the pain of 1,000 victims by sort of sending a very small amount of electric current, to increase the shock level on them. None of the victims notices the effect of any one torture, but after each torturer has pressed her button and sent her current, the victims are all in excruciating pain, right? So, but it looks in that case that if you're pressing one of these buttons, you're not having a perceptible difference on any of the victims, right? So it looks, how are we going to apply the expected consequences approach there? The other sort of case really relevant to the climate ethics stuff is, so Gassang has argued very recently that there is a possibility that small increases in GHG emissions are certain not to make a determinate causal difference to climate events. And I'll say a little bit about why Gassang tries to say that and why I think it's just wrong-headed. So I actually think Gassang is wrong, and this possibility of indeterminate causal influence, like no fact of the matter about whether our acts cause something, isn't a real problem. So as Morgan Knapp and Goodman point out, small emissions have wide-ranging butterfly effects on the chaotic climate system. So it does seem that for any of these emissions, there's a small chance that they're going to make a huge difference elsewhere, right, because of sensitive dependence on initial conditions. But moreover, so to make sense of large amounts of greenhouse gases sufficing for climatic effects, but no small amounts of greenhouse gases determinately sufficing for these effects, but the small amounts add up to the big amounts, right? Gassang seems to assume that what's going on is that there's quantum indeterminacy, and this makes room for there being no fact of the matter about small emissions having certain effects, right? So if it's indeterminate, if there's really no fact of the matter about what would have happened had you not emitted, well, in some cases you would have had an effect, in some cases you wouldn't. It doesn't seem like you can say determinately, well, if you hadn't emitted, then this wouldn't have happened. But I think these are actually probably better treated as cases where there's just an objective chance that the small emissions determinately cause the climactic effects. To really go into this, we'd have to talk a little bit about probabilistic causation and different concepts of causation and stuff. But I think this is not where I think there's gonna, at the end of the day, be a real philosophical problem. Okay, so what I am worried about, though, is this argument from authors like Alistair Norcross and Shelley Kagan and Morgan Knapp not really working in the imperceptible differences cases. So these authors try to insist that even in the imperceptible difference cases, or apparently imperceptible difference cases, certain acts must actually make a determinate perceptible difference because at some point, small increases in the amount of electric current, say in the harmless torturers case, are just going to have to make the victim feel worse. right? That because, hey, they feel worse at the end, so there must have been some point where a small difference pushed them and made them feel worse. Well, the problem with this is, like Julianevsky, I suspect that Kagan and all are too quick to conclude that there can't be vague boundaries between what does and doesn't feel worse, right? I think phenomena, the way states feel from the inside can actually be vague, and relations between them can be vague. So it might well be that for each increase in current, there's no determinate fact of the matter about whether it feels worse or does not feel worse to the victim. So part of this is feelings are realized by complex neural states, and there are likely states that realize feelings, neither of which feels worse than the other, but which don't feel exactly equally bad either. And I can talk more about that in the Q&A if you want. And here's the, here's the big news. I don't think that this is fatal to the expected consequences approach, because I think, by just working a little bit with this thing that Susanna Renard has done, we can show how the approach can be extended to genuine cases of indeterminacy in the morally relevant factors. Right. So what Susanna Renard has done is extended the decision theory, extended standard decision theory to cases of indeterminate likelihoods of outcomes. I think she's done this in an extremely convincing way. So her key idea is that when it's indeterminate what the likelihoods are, right, we should do two things. We should consider the set of all what's called by philosophers admissible precisifications, or ways of making the likelihoods determinate that don't violate what they determinately aren't. And we should conclude that an act is permissible just in case it would be permissible according to every admissible precisification. And it's impermissible if it's impermissible according to every admissible precisification, and it's neither determinately permissible nor determinately impermissible if it's permissible according to some but not other admissible precisifications, right? So I think what we can do is we can extend Renard's solution to the present case, where not just the likelihoods are not the likelihoods for simplicity, but the value of the outcomes is what's indeterminate, right? Because it's bad if it's worse, it's not bad if it's not worse, but if it's neither determinately bad or worse, it's not determinately, bad or ethically bad or not, right? So here, just to work through it, let n0 through n1000 be the neural states caused by 0 through 1000 amounts of current in the harmless tortures, where for some x it's not determinate whether nx plus 1 is worse than nx, but clearly determinately n1000 is worse than n0. So what we should do, okay, sorry, I'm almost out of time, but I'm almost done. So what we should do to apply, I think, Renard's idea is we should consider the set of all admissible precisifications or ways of assigning value to n0 through n1000, consistent with n1000 being much worse than n0. So and then we conclude, as Renard suggests we should, that an act is permissible just in case it would be permissible according to every admissible precisification, whereas now we're dealing with these precisifications of the vagueness of the values as opposed to the likelihoods, which was what she was doing. Here's what we get in the harmless tortures. Well, each admissible precisification is going to have to distribute the difference in value between n0 and n1000, abbreviating V here, among the various states. So on each admissible precisification, there's going to be n states with shares S1 to Sn of this value, which together those shares have to sum to the value, right? So for any admissible precisification, since it has to obey that, its expected harm is going to be basically 1 over 1,000 times S1, times each of the shares, right, times S1, S2, Sn, for each of the outcomes that get some of that negative value, right, where we're saying it does feel bad, right, or feel worse, which is equivalent to the expected harm of a 1 in 1,000 chance of causing just the difference in value between nothing and the full shock, which is the same expected harm that we would get if we just insisted that the difference in value had to be distributed among adjacent points that were determinately different from each other, right? So the precisifications are by taking the expected harms of each of the precisifications, they're going to get the same results as if we had insisted that there's no vagueness here. So your act is going to be permissible in genuinely imperceptible difference cases, just in case it would have been permissible if Kagan and Norcross and all the others were right, and all the morally relevant differences in these cases were actually determinate. So the expected consequences approach, I think, works just as well, even if there is genuine indeterminacy. And again, I only really worry about this in the in the apparently imperceptible difference cases. I'd be curious if anyone thinks those correspond to anything real environmentally. I'm a little suspicious that maybe they don't, or maybe they don't to the most important stuff. And even though I think that the indeterministic causation stuff for climate effects is wrong, if it were right, this would still be a way to handle it and say, hey, even if our effects have no determinate difference, we need to reason by sharpening up what differences they could have if they had determinate differences, and still we'd get the same result as if we reasoned with them having chances of clearly determinate differences. So yeah, so I think it works. Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Nye. Two really interesting presentations. Perhaps I'll start by inviting the two panelists to see if they would like to offer a question or suggest a further line for discussion among the two of you.
So I could ask something, but did you have any immediate response to me, or? Oh, I can't. Sorry, the volume's down. I can't hear. I can't hear at all. Okay, they're fixing the volume. So because right now there's no volume. Sorry. No.
Okay.
Oh, you're coming through now. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. No, I was just. I mean, as was mentioned before, I'm a member of a group that's called Energy and Society, and the reasons why we sort of called ourselves this is that we wanted to understand what impact, of course, society, whether it's groups, communities, individuals, has. Because unfortunately, we are not always reasonable, and unfortunately, we're not always rational in our choices. Even though when we know about, it would be better to not drive a car, it would be better to not do this. So I'm just wondering about your comment as well in terms of, on capitalism, only the economically illiterate would ever think about a system that is not the existing system. No, as a historian, and I think this is also why I'm fascinated by that concept of sustainability, if it really means solidarity between generations, then that is already a very specific understanding and a contract almost between generations that doesn't translate into, specific rationale or specific cost analysis. It is a decision that a society makes for specific cultural reasons. So, I'm not surprised that the Brundtland Commission, which was headed by a Norwegian, very familiar with the Scandinavian discussions on solidarity within societies. So I'm a bit more hesitant to say that, we can't just say that these are economically illiterate people who suggest that there might be different models out there, because some of it cannot be economized, some of it cannot be monetized, and some of it is a very specific cultural decision or historically grown sort of decision to have this built into, if you will, societal contract.
Great.
That people are willing to pay for certain things.
Cool. So I think I got the question. So thanks. That's really helpful, and it's very related to what I was going to ask you, actually. So let me just say a few things. First of all, I do think that the stuff about individuals in the future, right? I mean, that's like a lot of when I was worried about the humans and non-human animals, most of that is individuals who are in the future. So I'm just talking, my ethical approach is clearly dealing with ethical individuals in the future. Now, one thing I worry about in what you said is I don't think it's helpful to think about these ethical duties as having to do with a contract. For one thing, there's no way that they can reciprocate us, these future individuals, right? For another thing, many of the individuals we're going to harm are individuals who can't make contracts. Many human infants, right? Human infants we're killing before they ever grow up to make contracts, and severely intellectually disabled humans who are never going to be able to make contracts, even if their lives are preserved. And of course, the non-human animals. So I think a contract's just the wrong way to think about it. I think the moral basis of this should be the principle of non-maleficence, just that there's moral reasons not to harm others. I actually think that the principle of non-maleficence is more clearly right than any kind of contract idea that you should keep your promises. I mean, if I had to reduce either the wrongness of harm to promises or the wrongness of promise keeping to the fact that it might inflict harm, well, clearly you're going to reduce. We should reduce the wrongness of breaking promises to the wrongness of inflicting harm, because it usually tends to inflict harm, and when it's not going to be harmful, the reasons to keep promises are really quite weak. So I don't want to go in for promises. I want to go into basic duties of non-maleficence to all sentient beings. So to get to this thing about capitalism, first of all, sorry, I was also going to say something about the rationality. So I totally agree with you. I mean, I'm talking about what we should do and how we should reason. And the whole problem is that we don't reason this way, I think. But I actually think when you go, for me anyway, when I go through those expected harm calculations and I see, okay, by driving, it's the equivalent of ruining, ruining the afternoons of like at least 28 sentient beings, that really motivates me not to do it, right? And when I understand with an e-conference, right, this could actually save lives, right, that really motivates me to do it. So I actually think that this kind of reasoning can have profound motivational influences when you do it the right way. Okay, so to the economic stuff, here's one big problem I just have. I have no idea what individuals who complain about capitalism mean by capitalism. So as far as I know, Karl Marx introduced the term capitalism. Karl Marx's predictive economic theory failed. It just didn't work. So I think the term capitalism, is a lot like the term phlogiston. It's a posit of a scientific theory that didn't cut it, right? So now I don't know what you mean by this. What I hear when I hear people complain about capitalism is they're complaining about market economies and private ownership of productive assets, regardless of how much regulation we have, regulation and redistribution we have. And every successful, decent, progressive economy, Northern Europe, what Bernie Sanders is trying to do, what the liberals and NDP are trying to do here in Canada, all of that works against a backdrop of largely privately owned assets and market economies. I mean, central planning fails miserably. You try central planning, you get Korea. The successful nominally communist economies like the Chinese, they don't do central planning. They have largely shared because, as Hayek pointed out long ago, that's the only way to deal with these informational dynamics. Now, does the market deal with things, with people who aren't morally motivated? Does the market deal with things like harm to innocent beings? Of course not, right? That's why you need to have regulations. That's why you need to have taxes. That's why we need to take personal action, right? But when I hear complaints about capitalism, all I hear is complaints about privately owned assets and market economies, and independent of trying to have a carbon tax or trying to have a municipal tax on garbage or any of this, right? It's just like let's tear the whole thing down and become North Korea is all I hear. And I think that's radically unhelpful. And the more you associate environmental advocacy with that kind of just fringe economic idea that sounds insane to most people, the more you're going to create climate deniers, and the more you're going to create people who elect conservative reactionary politicians who do nothing to the environment, just like we had in the United States. So I think if you have a complaint about the economy, say what it is. Don't just complain about the totality of functioning economies, right? Like, yeah, please. So sorry. I guess I'm sorry. I get a little upset about this because I think this is something we're doing very badly as progressives. So can you just tell me, what do you mean when you say capitalism?
Well, first of all, I'd like to go back, though, because you mentioned harm expectations.
Yeah.
And that, if there are certain harm expectations, then that will trigger me to do certain things. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, as a historian, what I would respond to that is, who actually creates the acceptable narrative of what any harm expectation of any behavior is? That is something, it is not a given. So, for example, the way that we know for some of the environmental issues, it was much easier to address them through government legislation and certain acts when we actually framed them as health issues first. Mm-hmm. So issues that really affected human beings. Mm-hmm. This is how we got the Clean Air Act in the 1970s. This is how we addressed in some jurisdictions nuclear. And only when it's sort of environmental issues were redefined as not so much harming the environment than harming the health of human beings, that led to changes in behavior. Mm-hmm. Now, for me, that's a very good example of at least being very cautious about accepting that there is any given harm expectation. These are narratives. These are what for anyone who will act constitutes an accepted harm expectation is already something that is filtered through certain ways.
Sure.
So I think this is where I'm the historian. I'm of course looking back. I'm also not someone who judges what people sort of preferred or what they bought into the discussion.
But I don't think you can afford to not judge what people, I mean, so Scott Pruitt values profits over lives. And so, sorry, I'm sure there's a slightly more charitable interpretation. But I know very well that in your own life, you do make judgments. This kind of complete moral relativism is not on the table. And so, look, I mean, I agree. It's a substantive ethical question, what constitutes morally important harm, right? And I think I've signaled that I have views about that I think can be supported by clear ethical reasoning. For example, that harms to non-human animals of comparable sizes to those to humans are just as ethically important as not. But I know that's not a very widely accepted view. So, the real important question is, in order to figure out what the actually acceptable harms are, you have to do basic ethical reasoning and think about empirical stuff too. So that's a whole project. My reference to expected harm is whatever we think expected harm is, right? Or whatever we should think. Here's how to reason about it. And so I totally agree with you that the public's views about what is acceptable harm are not quite right. I mean, they're not quite where we would go if we reason. Yeah, well, that's what I think. So I don't think that the public's views about acceptable harm are what they would be if we reason through this stuff very carefully, right? But we don't have time to get them to reason through this stuff very carefully. So I agree with you that it's really important rhetorically, strategically, to appeal to stuff that they do already care about. And that's one of the reasons I talked about the importance of the non-maleficence beneficence thing. Because, so for example, I think if you start saying, well, hey, let's help people in developing countries, a lot of ordinary Canadians would be like, no way, why should I care? Whereas if you say, hey, look, a civilized society doesn't inflict massive harm on others for relatively trivial benefits, that's something they can get on board with. So I agree with you that we're constrained in our advocacy by what's going to be rhetorically effective, but we can still try to sort of reason correctly within those constraints. So that's one of the reasons why I think when we're talking about, say, harms to non-human animals, it's important to talk about, the ecological damage of harming them, which a lot of humans can get on board with, even if, if they thought more carefully about it, I think that they'd realize that the harms to non-human animals matter in their own right. Yeah.
But those reasonings can be very different from country to country. So it's not just a top-down social engineering where you actually, you decide what's the best rhetoric that will convince people.
I actually don't.
Can I just finish that thought? Yeah. I think it's equally important to also realize that everyone who is trying to make sense of this is, of course, growing up in a certain environment. I'm a German. I have a very different sort of narrative for some of these issues than a lot of my Canadian colleagues do. Now that, for me as a historian, is a very clear indication of how important it is to realize that there isn't the one right way of narrating this, and that we have to accept that there are societies where, for example, the animal might be more important than the human. I mean, it's thinkable. So that's the point that I have in terms of, I don't think it helps us to say this is the right way that we should make these decisions. We should much rather be very open to different experiences of interpreting and narrating and growing up in certain societies that frame these discussions very differently. And that's what I tried to do with my presentation here, to also remind ourselves, because the sustainability discussion comes out of those 70s, 80s discussion, it has that very specific aspect.
So I strongly agree.
And it's not to say it's right or wrong.
Yeah.
It's just to try and understand it better.
So I strongly agree with you that we shouldn't just say it's our way or the highway. We should argue for our views, right? So I think I've given arguments that this is the right way to reason that have appealed to things that others will find plausible. Now, you just don't think that there's no better answers than others, because I know you don't accept that Pruitt has the right ethical view, or that Trump and the Koch brothers have the right ethical view. So we need to get away from this ethical relativism. And I do think that you're massively exaggerating the differences in in the moral psychology of different humans. So Jonathan Haidt and many others have done have done a lot of empirical research and shown that actually the basic moral foundations, harm and fairness being a central one of them, that different humans across all societies will find plausible, are actually very much the same. Now, exactly how exactly how they think that's relevant, and how they take those factors to be relevant, you're right, it depends all about environmental contingencies and things like that. But I think, from doing philosophy with many individuals from many different cultures, I see no reason to think that when we actually think about these things clearly and make distinctions like between intellectual ability and mere biological species membership and all this stuff, and sort of contracts covering typical human adults but not profoundly intellectually disabled humans, I see no indication that our views don't converge. And so I see every reason to think that actually if we do together do this careful rational scrutiny thing, which my talk was an attempt at being an instance of, we actually will converge in our views. We have enough similar starting points to get there. Thanks.
So I'm going to leap in here to signal that we're coming close to the end of our time together, and I would like to thank our two presenters, thank the conference organizers. I think this has been a really interesting hour of reflection, not just on the history and philosophy and future of sustainability, but potentially also on how practitioners from two quite different disciplines might approach these concepts, and to put them in juxtaposition a little bit. So I've found that quite useful. Thanks to you both. Thanks to the conference organizers.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Joining the meeting.
Elle est passée joyeusement à côté de toutes les façons.
Voilà. Jeff est là.
Hey, Jeffrey! We can't really hear you. The sound is not working.
Yes. Okay. Well, I would like to thank the panelists from the last session for a very lively and fascinating discussion. I particularly enjoyed both thinking historically about the context of sustainability. I'm one of those people who has probably used it without understanding that historical context, and of course Howard Nye's arguments for sustainability and from a philosophical perspective. So on that note, we now switch to a roundtable discussion coming to us from Montreal. And the topic is l'accès libre, un devoir moral et scientifique. And this is being brought to us by a group at the Université de Montreal, Marcello Vitali, Michael Sinatra, Nicolas, Sauret, Jean-Claude, Guédon, Joana, Casenave, and I'm going to hand it over to them and thank them for joining us.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey, et bienvenue à cette table ronde sur l'accès libre qui va être en français. Nous espérons que les amis anglophones arriveront à nous suivre. Le constat de débat, la question que nous souhaitions poser dans cette table ronde, c'est où nous en sommes avec la question de l'accès libre, aussi en relation à la question de la soutenabilité, qui était d'ailleurs un des enjeux au début du mouvement de l'accès libre, notamment la Budapest Open Access Initiative en 2002 avait stipulé que en 10 ans, il aurait fallu que l'accès libre soit la méthode par défaut pour distribuer la recherche, pour disséminer la recherche. Alors, la question s'est posée après plus que 15 ans de Budapest, après d'autres appels. Je rappelle pour le monde francophone l'appel des Jussieu qui est sorti avec des enjeux semblables à ceux de Budapest en 2017, je pense, ou 2016. Alors, on reste quand même avec beaucoup de problématiques dans le monopole assez présent encore de certains géants de l'édition scientifique comme Elsevier et Wiley par exemple. Donc où nous en sommes depuis, quels étaient les points de départ et quels sont les points d'arrivée. Alors pour commencer, j'ai demandé à Jean-Claude Guédon qui était parmi les signataires de Budapest. Si donc Jean-Claude, tu peux rapidement nous rappeler quels étaient les enjeux en 2002 et comment ces enjeux ont évolué dans les temps et aujourd'hui, qu'est-ce qu'il en est de ce qui a été pensé à Budapest en 2002.
Merci Marcello. Eh bien, pour aller vite, on pourrait dire que, comme toujours en histoire, les acteurs lisent très mal la situation dans laquelle ils s'inscrivent et les raisons qui les motivent ne donnent pas toujours les résultats qu'ils escomptent, étant donné que, précisément, ils ont un regard, je dirais, déporté par rapport à la dynamique centrale de ce qui est en train d'animer réellement et plus profondément l'histoire. En l'occurrence, pour parler un peu moins abstraitement, tout a été déclenché sur le plan humain, sur le plan des émotions, des engagements, de toutes les forces qui pouvaient se libérer autour de ce qu'on appelle maintenant le libre accès. Tout ça a été déclenché par une crise dans le prix des publications savantes qui s'était manifestée depuis les années 70 et qui rapidement avait démontré que le système de communication savant qui avait existé assez efficacement et harmonieusement jusqu'à la Deuxième Guerre mondiale était en train de prendre une autre tournure qui n'était plus acceptable et en tout cas qui n'était plus du tout possible dans le cadre de budget de bibliothèque et ainsi de suite. Donc on voit un mouvement qui se déclenche en réaction contre ça, mais en fait tout le mouvement du libre accès, si on le regarde d'un peu plus loin, comme on peut le faire maintenant rétrospectivement, est un mouvement qui a été déclenché comme un avatar, comme une retombée de quelque chose de beaucoup plus profond qui se passait en même temps et qui était le début de la numérisation, mais aussi une numérisation qui elle-même devait s'inscrire dans l'évolution des publications savantes après la Seconde Guerre mondiale. Pour peut-être clarifier ce dernier point très très vite, disons que les publications savantes après la Deuxième Guerre mondiale s'étaient transformées de voies d'expression de groupes et communautés scientifiques qu'on appelle des sociétés savantes, qu'on appelle des associations savantes ou bien même des institutions. Et tout ça s'était transformé carrément en marchandises grâce à pas mal de petites inventions qui avaient permis de rentabiliser ce genre d'opération et qui avaient été mises en œuvre et en branle en particulier par Robert Maxwell en Grande-Bretagne. Donc on a cette espèce de démarrage qui part sur une fausse piste et qui est soutenu parce que c'est lancé sur une fausse piste, qui est soutenu par les bibliothécaires qui espèrent ainsi faire baisser le prix des publications savantes et de pouvoir enfin remplir leur rôle traditionnel de bibliothécaire dans un cadre qui leur échappait sur le plan économique. Ce dont ils ne se rendaient pas compte, il y avait beaucoup de choses dont ils ne se rendaient pas compte, mais l'une d'entre elles, c'était que leur désir de faire baisser les prix par le libre accès était une chimère. Ça ne s'est pas passé et ça n'a pas réussi. Et ceci n'a pas réussi parce qu'il y avait aussi une mauvaise analyse, je crois, à l'origine des acteurs qui étaient en jeu. Le chercheur était au cœur du mouvement du libre accès, mais ce chercheur est un être beaucoup plus complexe qu'on ne l'avait compris en 2002. Moi, je le dis toujours qu'il y a au moins trois êtres possibles dans un chercheur. Il y a le chercheur qui cherche de l'information, il y a le chercheur qui cherche un statut, et puis peut-être associé au deuxième point, mais quand même de façon relativement spécifique, il y a le chercheur qui devient membre de la publication en étant soit éditeur, soit membre d'un comité éditorial et jouant ainsi le rôle d'interface quelque part entre les communautés de chercheurs et les publications. Et on a donc donc à partir de ce moment-là un système qui essaye de se développer sans prendre en compte cette différence et qui nous conduit au présent. Parce que d'un côté, le libre accès répond aux besoins des chercheurs en quête d'information, là-dessus il n'y a pas de problème, mais il ne répond pas de façon efficace, en tout cas, au problème du chercheur qui cherche un statut. Qui détient les clés du statut pour le chercheur? Eh bien, il faudrait beaucoup de temps pour expliquer tout ça, mais par l'évolution justement mercantile et le développement des revues de la façon dont elles se sont développées à partir des années 70, eh bien, le statut des chercheurs dépendait non plus de la qualité de ce que faisaient les chercheurs, mais de l'endroit où ils publiaient. La revue devenait en fait la garantie de la qualité pour le chercheur, et le chercheur était jugé par la revue. Et nous sommes toujours dans cette situation-là. Sauf que, et je vais m'arrêter là-dessus parce qu'autrement je vais aller trop loin, mais je pense qu'il y a deux nouveaux intervenants, en quelque sorte, si on prenait une sorte de théorie de l'acteur réseau au sens de Calon et la Tour et les autres. Il y a d'autres intervenants qui commencent à monter en puissance et qui vont finalement, je crois, beaucoup changer la donne. C'est d'un côté la remise en avant de l'importance de l'unité de publication qui peut être une monographie, un article ou quoi que ce soit entre les deux. Ça, j'aime appeler ça les cristaux de connaissances. Et puis, de l'autre côté, il y a les plateformes. Et les plateformes qui vont se mettre en concurrence les unes avec les autres. Et d'une certaine façon, ces plateformes vont devoir, en quelque sorte, établir leur réputation, leur qualité, leur professionnalisme et ainsi de suite. Et elles vont devoir également se mettre en relation les unes avec les autres. Et là, le libre accès va donner un énorme avantage aux plateformes libres, parce qu'elles pourront se mettre en relation bien plus facilement que des plateformes qui sont en concurrence commerciale. Au bout de compte, et ce sera ma conclusion, cette lutte entre le monde commercial qui cherche à garder sa position à l'intérieur de la communication scientifique et le monde libre, si vous voulez, de la publication scientifique, va se régler par le groupe ou la faction ou la tendance qui va pouvoir le mieux répondre aux deux, sinon aux trois rôle que jouent les chercheurs, c'est-à-dire chercheurs d'information et chercheurs de statut, et peut-être dans une certaine mesure un positionnement d'interface entre le moment de la publication et les chercheurs. Donc il y a là, je crois, les éléments essentiels très ramassés en quelques secondes de la situation de 2002 et 2018.
Merci beaucoup Jean-Claude. Alors pour faire le pont avec ce que tu disais, donc ces trois statuts de chercheurs me semblent très intéressants. Alors on peut se dire que le cœur du mouvement de l'accès libre, au moins le type de document auquel l'accès libre visait en premier lieu, étaient les articles des revues, comme après évidemment il a été étendu à toutes sortes de productions scientifiques, mais les revues ont été au cœur, peut-être aussi parce que la mission des revues était la plus proche à ces trois rôles que tu mentionnes, et donc l'idée du chercheur qui cherche de l'information, du statut, et donc l'article étant considéré, comme tu le disais tout à l'heure, comme le pilier de la production scientifique. Donc c'est qui compte, hein, le cristal, pour utiliser ton terme, des connaissances est l'article, donc la forme est l'article. Du coup, les revues ont un rôle fondamental. Du coup, j'aimerais demander à Nicolas Sauret, qui est doctorant ici à l'Université de Montréal et qui fait notamment une thèse sur les revues et sur les formes des conversations scientifiques liées aux revues, notamment avec un projet aussi, une étude des cas sur une revue en particulier qui est Sens Public. Je demanderais à Nicolas quel est ton point de vue par rapport au rôle et à la fonction de l'accès libre pour les revues et pour leur mission, pour leur statut.
Je vais être un peu moins sage que Jean-Claude, qui semble avoir trouvé une solution un peu qui vient réconcilier toutes les positions. Moi, je vais prendre le modèle sur chacun, mais en étant un peu plus idéaliste. Et je pense que pour les revues, il est nécessaire de repartir peut-être de la base, c'est-à-dire de repenser un petit peu la manière dont on écrit. Et considérer que cette écriture est un processus, et donc les revues ont un rôle à jouer dans une refonte de la chaîne de production de l'écrit, notamment pour prendre en compte les spécificités et les potentialités du texte numérique. Et une de ces potentialités, une de ces spécificité, c'est l'ouverture, et que ce soit à la fois l'ouverture des connaissances ou l'ouverture des codes qui vient structurer les architectures de la publication et de la diffusion. Voilà, et le numérique porte véritablement ce caractère récursif, et finalement l'accès libre des écritures scientifiques ne pourra pas aller sans l'ouverture des écritures des plateformes. Et c'est un petit peu ce que tu envisageais avec les plateformes libres. Voilà, il faut donc que les revues s'émancipent des outils et des formats propriétaires, y compris dans les pratiques d'écriture des chercheurs. Et il me semble que cela ne peut être fait que si l'université et peut-être aussi les revues sont prescriptives sur ces pratiques au sein des institutions. Voilà. Enfin, l'ouverture des connaissances est synonyme de l'ouverture d'un espace susceptible d'accueillir la conversation scientifique. Et c'est en cela que la revue peut devenir un espace public. Et c'est aussi une question d'architecture. La revue peut venir structurer un espace que les chercheurs ou la communauté de chercheurs va ensuite habiter, occuper, traverser, et d'où l'idée du projet qu'on mène à Sens Public de peut-être repenser les formats de la communication scientifique. Il y a un précédent, c'est la création du format de l'article. Il est peut-être temps maintenant de repenser un nouveau format. Un nouveau format éditorial pour une communication scientifique plus fluide, plus ouverte également. Et c'est ce qu'on essaie de faire avec ce format conversationnel de la communication.
Merci Nicolas. Du coup, petite remarque, on arrive à dire, je pense que Jean-Claude, tu es aussi d'accord, que l'accès libre n'est pas juste une question ça correspond à ton analyse, n'est pas juste une question de mettre gratuitement disponible des textes en ligne, mais c'est question vraiment de repenser les formes de production et de circulation de la connaissance avec toute l'institution qui est autour, donc l'évaluation, etc. Et aussi les formes et les formats. Ce qui fait que probablement il y a un lien fort, à mon sens, entre le mouvement de l'accès libre et le mouvement du libre en général. C'est-à-dire que penser les architectures logicielles, mais aussi les architectures sociales qui permettent les échanges devient fondamental, et que ces architectures-là soient libres dans leur conception et dans leur négociation devient la condition des possibilités d'une circulation libre des textes. Donc il suffit pas de prendre un texte et de payer $1000 pour qu'il soit accessible gratuitement, mais il faut vraiment repenser complètement l'architecture sociale, institutionnelle et logicielle à l'époque du numérique qui permet cette circulation. Du coup, outre que les revues qui en effet étaient au centre, il faut aller un peu au-delà de ces acteurs centraux, et je demanderai à Michael Sinatra, qui est professeur ici à l'Université de Montréal et qui est le directeur du Centre interuniversitaire sur les humanités numériques et co-directeur avec moi d'une expérience d'accès libre sur les monographies aux presses de l'Université de Montréal. Je te demanderai, Michael, à ton avis, dans cette vision de repenser une architecture aussi logicielle, sociale, institutionnelle de l'accès, où on peut placer le format, la forme monographie, quels peuvent être les enjeux, et peut-être tu peux nous dire un mot aussi de notre expérimentation.
Merci Marcello. Oui, alors pour commencer par Parcours numérique, donc qui existe depuis maintenant 2014, et dans lequel nous avons publié 9 ouvrages. J'ai la tendance de vous regarder vous, mais la caméra est là. L'idée avait été vraiment, effectivement, comme Marcello l'a souligné, de voir comment une presse dite traditionnelle, papier, payante, comme les presses de l'Université de Montréal, s'embarquait pour un pari qui n'était non seulement de créer une collection qui offrait une version en accès libre, exactement pour aller au-delà, comme le soulignait Marcello, de la contrainte simple de un PDF disponible, ou des efforts tout à fait laudables de Open Edition qui travaillent avec des maisons d'édition qui mettent une version en accès libre de un peu plus de 3000 livres en HTML sur leur site, mais d'essayer de voir dans quelle mesure on pouvait aussi penser cette complémentarité des formats pour amener de notre côté les presses à repenser leur propre modèle de production, de réfléchir à leurs coûts, de réfléchir à la manière dont un livre est conçu, et aussi, et c'est une partie qui a été la partie la plus enrichissante pour nous, de travailler avec une webmestre, Hélène Bochef, qui a accompagné les auteurs de notre collection pour penser une version enrichie. Et donc nous n'avons pas voulu penser juste une version homothétique du livre disponible en PDF ou en HTML, mais bien une version différente et complémentaire pour essayer justement de se dire, nous avons l'opportunité technique, avec la technologie dans laquelle nous disposons, de faire plus qu'un simple transfert. Est-ce que ça amène les auteurs à réfléchir? Pour certains, ça a été plus un challenge que d'autres. Mais nous avons donc eu un petit peu ce plaisir-là de voir comment les choses allaient se passer. Jeffrey, on n'a plus notre image de notre côté. C'est en étant encore. On a déjà la suite des diapos. Et donc de voir avec ces auteurs-là, justement, est-ce que la version en accès libre les amenait eux-mêmes à transformer leur manière de penser une monographie, donc de repenser l'appareil critique traditionnel avec ses centaines d'années de travail, de notes de bas de page et des choses comme ça, de voir comment on avait une possibilité de reconcevoir cet accompagnement de l'auteur, et en particulier, comme je l'ai souligné, par le travail de notre webmestre, qui amenait les auteurs à repenser les possibilités à la fois techniques et sociales de leur ouvrage, de par la manière de diffuser, de faire des capsules vidéo, de faire des choses qui, quelque part, n'étaient pas révolutionnaires dans une certaine mesure, mais l'étaient dans le milieu de la monographie, qui est beaucoup plus standard, surtout en sciences humaines, de par l'objet d'étude qu'elle est faire. Nous avons tous lu des ouvrages avec des chiffres de vente très peu faits, qui ont en fait un moyen généralement carriéral, beaucoup plus que pour l'avancement des connaissances.
Peter,
et
hang
donc
up
l'idée
now, we're
derrière...
live.
Donc l'idée c'est de pouvoir réfléchir à ces modèles-là.
Donc merci encore une fois. Du coup, il ne s'agit pas juste de mettre à disposition des textes gratuitement, mais il s'agit plutôt de repenser les modèles et l'effet de repenser les modèles. Et c'est pour ça que l'expérience avec les presses de l'Université de Montréal était, nous avons un peu de retour micro de l'autre côté. Donc l'expérience avec les presses de l'Université de Montréal était importante justement pour son côté institutionnel. Évidemment, la monographie est en sciences humaines le pilier de l'évaluation des carrières. Donc, on devient professeur quand on a professeur adjoint quand on a une monographie, deux monographies. C'est un peu caricatural, mais c'est presque comme ça. Les comités d'évaluation sont fortement basés sur ça. Et du coup, avoir des presses universitaires qui pouvaient dire que les expériences que nous faisions étaient des monographies, donc qui pouvaient être comptées d'un point de vue des CV et d'évaluation de la carrière comme telle, c'était un essai, même si peut-être un peu timide, mais un premier essai pour dire on peut repenser des modèles et les faire valider institutionnellement, légitimer institutionnellement pour qu'ils soient reconnus aussi dans le cadre de l'évaluation qui est les chercheurs qui cherchent le statut justement, surtout d'ailleurs pour les jeunes chercheurs qui entament leur carrière, devient un en effet, parmi les trois rôles, c'est peut-être le plus important pour un doctorant. Entre les trois, évidemment, il a d'abord besoin d'assurer la suite de sa carrière. Donc, dans ce sens, encore plus, une forme encore plus, peut-être, qui pose encore plus de défis au niveau éditorial est le domaine de l'édition critique, qui est un domaine, évidemment, fortement caractérisé par une série de paradigmes épistémologiques sur la validité de la méthode, etc. Et sa circulation, sa mise en place, son appareil critique, ça a aussi sa mise en place physique. Du coup, je demanderai à Joana Casenave, qui est postdoc ici à l'Université de Montréal et qui travaille justement sur les éditions critiques à l'époque du numérique, donc sur ce que le numérique peut apporter aux éditions critiques. Quels sont pour toi les enjeux pour l'édition critique d'un point de vue à la fois, donc par rapport à l'accès libre, d'un point de vue à la fois de accessibilité, visibilité, mais aussi statut symbolique?
Oui, mais justement, dans le domaine des éditions critiques numériques, la problématique se pose en des termes un peu différents parce que elles sont généralement quasiment toutes en accès libre. Les éditions critiques numériques sont réalisées dans le cadre généralement de projets de recherche, de programmes de recherche, et sont mises à disposition par les universités de manière libre. J'avais fait une petite observation à partir du répertoire qui est élaboré par Patrick Salleux. Donc sur 400 éditions critiques numériques, seulement une vingtaine sont payantes, ce qui fait qu'on a quasiment 95% de la production des éditions critiques numériques qui est effectivement en accès libre. Et le problème qui se pose pour les éditions critiques numériques, c'est davantage celui du référencement et de la visibilité du travail. Est-ce que les éditions critiques numériques sont vraiment visibles sur les moteurs de recherche? Pas forcément, en fonction de leur manière de référencement. Et est-ce que les chercheurs ont l'habitude ou le réflexe d'aller chercher une édition critique numérique dans les catalogues de bibliothèques d'une part, ou dans dans les moteurs de recherche génériques? Non, pas forcément. Donc c'est vraiment là que se cristallise un problème spécifique aux éditions critiques numériques. Et pour y répondre, il y a certaines initiatives qui se mettent en place. Je voudrais en parler de deux. La première, c'est justement une jeune chercheuse de l'université de Göttingen qui s'appelle Greta Franzini, qui a réalisé avec son équipe un catalogue d'éditions numériques. Donc il a été mis en ligne l'année dernière, qui s'appelle Catalogue Digital Editions. L'intérêt de ce catalogue, c'est qu'il est collaboratif, donc n'importe qui peut entrer des informations sur les éditions critiques numériques, donc faire une entrée nouvelle dans ce catalogue, et les données qui sont présentées dans ce catalogue sont référencées et élaborées avec des outils du web sémantique, ce qui fait qu'elles sont interrogeables, d'une part de manière classique en cherchant une thématique, mais aussi on peut, à partir de ce catalogue-là, faire des recherches quantitatives sur les types de données publiées, les outils utilisés, ce genre de choses. Donc ça, c'est une des premières initiatives qui ajoute à la visibilité des éditions critiques numériques. En parallèle à l'élaboration de ce catalogue, cette équipe de recherche a mené en accord avec, là c'est la Bibliothèque nationale de l'Allemagne, pour que les données qui sont entrées dans ce catalogue soient également référencées dans le catalogue de la Bibliothèque nationale. Et une autre initiative, c'est celle qui est menée par Humanum, donc la très bien connue très grande infrastructure de recherche qui accompagne les projets de recherche en sciences humaines et sociales en France. Et justement, là, il y a quelques jours, ils ont créé un site web qui met en avant une liste de certains projets dont ils s'occupent et qu'ils estiment particulièrement intéressants. Donc c'est une liste qui est proposée avec la possibilité évidemment d'avoir une visualisation très précise de ce qu'il y a dans les sites web présentés, et de pouvoir, à partir de là, justement aller voir plus précisément quelles sont les éditions critiques numériques qui sont réalisées dans le cadre des projets de recherche des universités françaises. Donc c'est deux initiatives qui sont particulièrement intéressantes et qui sont élaborées en ce moment et qui apportent justement à la réflexion en cours sur comment faire pour que les éditions critiques numériques, qui sont réalisées en nombre dans les universités françaises et internationales, puissent être visibles par tous.
Merci beaucoup, Joana. Et en fait, encore une fois, la question de la visibilité, de l'accessibilité est liée à une question d'institutionnalisation et donc des retours des valeurs symboliques. Donc, un mot de la fin pour Jean-Claude, je dirais. Au vu de l'ensemble de ces considérations, quels sont, selon toi, les modèles institutionnels viables et soutenables aujourd'hui? Qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire concrètement aujourd'hui, donc à 16 ans de l'appel de Budapest?
Si on revient à la question des objets institutionnels qui se sont développés dans l'imprimé, on se rend compte que beaucoup d'entre eux sont absolument spécifiques à l'imprimé, en particulier le périodique qui maintenant est pris comme un objet pérenne, qui apparaît en fait comme une sorte de ce que j'aime appeler une mécanisation d'un système épistolaire et qui permet de mettre ensemble un bouquet de textes qui peuvent être diffusés de façon efficace par le truchement de l'imprimerie. Alors, je vais commencer mes remarques en disant que dans le monde numérique, l'institutionnalisation va probablement se manifester par deux choses simultanément. D'un côté, une sorte de reprise de termes que nous connaissons très bien, très familiers. Nicolas a parlé de revues, on a parlé d'articles, tout ça, monographie. Tous ces termes-là vont certainement rester, mais en même temps, il va falloir en quelque sorte les déplacer, les retraduire, les transposer dans le monde numérique pour qu'en fait, ils s'adaptent à ce nouveau contexte de la même façon qu'un livre dans le monde de l'imprimé n'est plus tout à fait la même chose que le livre romain, manuscrit et ainsi de suite. Ce sont des choses comme ça qu'il faut, je crois, bien voir. Alors, et en même temps, de nouveaux acteurs, encore une fois dans le sens d'acteurs réseau de Calon et Latour, de nouveaux acteurs apparaissent. Je vais revenir sur la notion de plateforme en particulier. Et enfin, il y a un dernier élément qu'il faut faire intervenir, c'est qu'un certain nombre je dirais, d'institutions qui sont en quelque sorte définies par un bouquet d'activités et de fonctions, laissent maintenant percevoir la possibilité de les déconstruire, de disséminer et de répartir autrement les différentes activités qui sont à l'intérieur de cet agrégat. Et je pense en particulier, bien sûr, à la maison d'édition. C'est parfaitement clair. On voit des fonctions de la maison d'édition en train de glisser vers les bibliothèques, vers des maisons d'édition et d'un genre particulier, les presses universitaires, parfois se déplacer dans des sites entièrement nouveaux qui n'ont pas encore eu d'équivalent dans l'histoire de la publication. Alors le résultat, je crois, quand on pose le problème de l'institutionnalisation à venir, si je puis dire, c'est que ça aura l'allure de quelque chose qui va reprendre des termes bien connus, mais qui vont prendre un sens différent. Ce qui va poser un problème pour les historiens de l'avenir, parce qu'évidemment, leur vision sera colorée par ces nouveaux sens aux mots, et ils vont probablement, comme nous l'avons fait nous-mêmes dans nos générations, ils vont joyeusement appliquer ces sens à des situations qui sont devenues anachroniques par rapport à leur vocabulaire, ou vice-versa. Je crois qu'il faut peut-être mieux quand même rendre le vocabulaire anachronique plutôt que les objets eux-mêmes, mais c'est un peu le problème de l'historicité, évidemment. Mais en même temps, ces termes vont commencer à s'organiser pour créer un environnement, un écosystème de diffusion et de dissémination de la communication scientifique en particulier, savante en tout cas, d'un nouveau genre. Alors par exemple, on a parlé de monographie et d'articles. Je pense que dans le monde numérique, d'abord cette distinction va devenir beaucoup plus floue. Il va y avoir toutes sortes de documents, beaucoup plus complexes d'une part que ces deux premiers documents, et qui en même temps vont devoir prendre un sens beaucoup plus souple, je dirais. On va passer d'articles très longs à des monographies très courtes, si bien qu'on aura des documents. Ces documents vont incorporer des médias qui ne sont pas possibles dans l'imprimé. Ça, c'est évident. Vidéo, son, tout ce qu'on veut là-dessus. Ces documents vont incorporer dans le monde savant quelque chose d'autre qui va devenir extrêmement important. C'est les bases factuelles ou les bases documentaires qui auront permis d'élaborer ce nouveau document. Donc, le document va se placer maintenant à l'intérieur d'un mouvement où l'antérieur va être visible et présent pour déterminer le postérieur. Et donc, la revue, en un sens, n'est plus l'endroit où, par un mécanisme soit de communauté, soit commercial, on rassemble des articles. La revue va devenir un lieu où on va pouvoir retrouver la dynamique d'une conversation, d'un dialogue, d'un débat. Et en fait, ce qui va demeurer stable, ça va être en gros quelque part le centre de gravité qui anime et qui permet à ces conversations d'exister, de se perpétuer et d'avancer. Donc je pense que là, il y a quelque chose qui me paraît très très différent. Et tout ça va se situer à l'intérieur d'un cadre plus vaste, qui va, je l'ai déjà dit, qui va être la plateforme. Donc les revues vont s'installer comme maîtres de certaines communautés avec certaines conversations, à l'intérieur d'un ensemble qui va gérer à l'intérieur de la plateforme un collectif, ou un ensemble plutôt, parce que c'est plus neutre, de telles conversations. Mais évidemment, sur d'autres plateformes, il va y avoir des conversations sinon analogues, du moins suffisamment proches pour que des sur-dialogues s'établissent entre ces choses-là, ces conversations, et donc les plateformes vont devoir elles-mêmes se réticuler. Tout va se réticuler du même coup. Ce qui veut dire aussi qu'à partir de ce moment-là, parler d'institution en termes de possession d'un site qui devient « je suis le meilleur, je suis le premier », et ainsi de suite, va perdre tout sens. Ce sont des nœuds dans des réseaux qui vont apparaître, et ces nœuds dans des réseaux vont commencer à survivre et à évoluer en fonction d'une dynamique générale de réseau qui, elle, est beaucoup plus vaste et beaucoup plus puissante que n'importe quel ensemble. Alors, ceci veut dire que je crois les ensembles de type commerciaux qui sont, eux, complètement condamnés à être autarciques, à être fermés, à être propriétaires, à vouloir avoir une logique commerciale surajoutée à une autre logique qui est celle de la recherche et du savoir. Tout ça, à terme, va se révéler être une série de handicaps extrêmement lourds pour pouvoir avancer. Et c'est pour ça que j'ai très bon espoir que dans une génération ou deux, ce système-là sera devenu extrêmement visible et en passe de devenir dominant. Mais ça va prendre du temps, comme ça l'a fait pour les revues savantes, pour s'imposer dans le monde des lettrés dans l'Europe. Rappelons-nous que l'imprimerie a démarré vers 1450 et les revues, les premières gazettes apparaissent en 1620, ce qui est beaucoup plus tard. Et puis les revues savantes, c'est 2 siècles après. Donc, à moins de penser que notre histoire s'est vraiment accélérée, ce dont je doute, sauf par quelques paramètres, cette évolution va être également longue dans notre monde et va laisser à toute une période, probablement au moins d'un siècle, de monde mixte et en évolution et en autodéfinition, si vous voulez.
Merci beaucoup, merci Jeffrey pour l'invitation. Et donc, juste pour conclure, en effet, on voit dans nos discussions que la question de la soutenabilité, qui pouvait sembler au début juste une question économique,
oui,
devient plutôt une question de repenser les modèles de la recherche, de la conversation et des communautés, et donc aussi du bien commun, voilà, qui est au centre de la recherche. Donc c'est ça la réflexion que nous voulions vous livrer. Merci beaucoup, Jeffrey.
Je sais.
On a fini. Back to you, Jeffrey.
C'était...
We can get up.
Hello, and thank you very much. Sorry, we're just trying to get the slides and things ready for the next speaker, and we had the microphones off. But thank you all from Université de Montreal, and we now want to, our next speaker is Terry Anderson. Terry Anderson is going to talk about virtual online conferences. How good do they have to be in order to be good enough? And Terry is someone who has been experimenting with virtual conferences and thinking about them for some time. So it's going to take us a moment to set things up. So we're just going to go to an identification screen, and as soon as the slides and stuff are set up, I will welcome Terry to talk. So I'm going to get out of your way.
Okay, we got that line. I know, we're just going to live with it. Okay. There's your... Yep. Okay. Ready to go?
Okay, well, thank you very much for this chance to come and talk to this crowd in real time here in this room, around the world, and I think it's really exciting to get a chance to be involved in virtual conferences. And you know, when you get old and retired like I am, the most fascinating things you can think about to talk about are retirement, health issues, and what a wonderful life you've had. So I'm going to focus, and I hope it might not be a little bit too idiocentric to myself, about my own experiences with virtual online conferences. And I want to start by, and I apologize for the green lines on the screen. How I first got interested in this, I was doing my PhD and doing research in Northern Ontario and talking to doctors, family physicians, and others. And a question was about professional development opportunities and how they accessed ways to keep up with their profession, and the effect that had on their longevity in the North. And so I interviewed a number of them, and a common kind of a response was, you know, why I don't like going to professional development activities is I have to get away from my family and kids, I have to get away from my practice, I have to drive in a car, I have to get on an airplane, I have to find a taxi, I have to go sleep in a hotel that I've never been to before. And it says it's such a hassle. And I said, okay, and what are the advantages of going to these professional developments? And they said, well, I get to get away from my wife and kids, I get to get away from my practice, I get to go for a nice car ride, I get to go on an airplane, I get to go on a hotel. So I realized that, you know, there's something gained in the face-to-face interaction, but there's of course something lost. And in the 30 years since that research, the cost, as we heard in our earlier presentations, in terms of environmental degradation, is increased quite significantly and continues to increase. So I think that there's a huge potential and a huge future, as well as I'll talk about the past of virtual conferences in this presentation today. So this was my first effort. I was a PhD student at Calgary, and I had been a distance education administrator, and I'd been used to flying around the world to go to conferences on distance education to talk about how wonderful it was not to have to stay at home and take courses and things like that. The irony never never passes. But all of a sudden, I had no money, no funding, and I thought, well, there's grad students, and more importantly, there's distance education practitioners all around the world who are in that exact context, is they just don't have the money, or maybe they don't have the time, or it's physically impossible for them to get to a face-to-face conference. So I thought, well, what if we could do a virtual conference? And at that time, I emailed to 6 of the grand gurus of distance ed around the world and asked if they would be the first speaker in a virtual conference. And of course, none of them had even heard of what a virtual conference, so it was fairly easy to talk them into saying yes. But the problem was, this was before the internet. This was in 1992, but there was BitNet, Usenet, NetNorth, FidoNet. There was a whole bunch of these separate networks, often with different kinds of standards. And so the interaction on that first virtual conference was a text opening talk with a moderator sprinkling, mostly me, sprinkling in questions, and then inviting these to go out on the email, and then over the next few days, trying to engage in an asynchronous email conversation. And because there wasn't one internet, we had a lot of what we called porters, and people who took it from one network and physically cut and pasted it into another network. I also tried to make a linkage between the face-to-face conference in Bangkok and this virtual one. But talking to the people in Bangkok, they had no idea what I was talking about, and they also thought that it would just take away from the experience of the face-to-face conference, which they did not want. And they said, and on top of that, we don't have computers, and in those days, people didn't carry around laptops as much as they do today. So I even asked IBM Thailand if they would sponsor a room, and again, I got nowhere. So But for me, it was a useful thing. I got a publication out of it. People seemed to enjoy it. We did an informal evaluation, and there was a couple of discourse analysis of the interaction that came out of it as well. So to me, it was a big success. And my total cost was I gave a book to each of the 6 keynote speakers. So that was it for the whole conference. But then the internet came along, and again, it didn't have a specific purpose. It was for anybody to use for anything. And so obviously virtual conferences came into my mind. So 3 years later, the International Council on Distance Education again had a face-to-face conference. And there were 550 distance educators who participated in this virtual conference, 36 countries. We made it last for 3 weeks, and I tried not to compete with the face-to-face conference, but to have it before the face-to-face conference, trying to get people excited about maybe going to the face-to-face. Again, it was listserv, mostly email, and we had one experiment using a MUD, a multi-user dungeon environment, sort of a first, second life kind of environment. But I don't know how to make this go forward. Oh, sorry. Okay, there we go. So what I did innovate on this was, though, I tried to have more learning activities than just a first speaker kind of thing. So we had a debate, a dialogue, a global brainstorm, a nominal technique, an open house, and a panel discussion. So I guess that was one of the innovative things. And you can see on the right there the number of interactions that it wasn't huge. But again, the price was right. It basically cost nothing to run this thing. And I got a publication out of it that you can see on the screen. So then a grad student and I, Lynn Anderson, decided, well, maybe there's enough interest in this to write a book. And so we did publish in 2010 a book called Online Conferences, Professional Development. And what we did for that was we interviewed people who'd been running virtual conferences for a number of years, tried to extract some best practices, what kind of activities they had, how they evaluated it. And then at that time, they were just starting to have the first conference that started to charge people money to attend a virtual conference, which again, people then as now are used to getting things online for free. So it was interesting to look at the different economic models. And that book is still in print. You can buy it anytime. So the key advantages, wide variations in the amount of time commitment by participants. And so that's both good and bad, I guess. You can see some people kind of lived and breathed the conference for 3 weeks, and other people read 2 emails or something. But it was on their time, and so they had that kind of choice. And they could shift the time to meet with whatever time availability they had. But the key lesson learned was that you're kidding yourself if you think you can get something out of it without putting any time into it. And so it isn't free time. We're not inventing time. We're just shifting time from one activity to another. So these conferences still go on. This is another veterinary conference around the world, their first virtual conference in 2018, as well as this one. So you're starting to see them. They're starting to have virtual trade fairs, and you can register for them. So then when we're starting to see companies form that support this kind of virtual conference as well. And, just a quote about, for me, this virtual conference means that I can attend. I would not be able to get the funding to attend. It means that I have a permanent record of all dialogue, which we're doing at this conference as well, which you don't get at most face-to-face conferences. It means I can choose when during the day I want to attend, and it means that I can listen to experts in my field that I would not be able to access otherwise. So then the next thing I was involved in along virtual conferences was this journal article that we wrote on effective, economical, and eco-friendly option. And what I wanted to do here was to use as a case study a real conference and see how much carbon had been saved by people participating in it. And And so what we did was we took a large conference that was held online. This is it was called Technology, College and Community Worldwide Online Conference. It was an annual conference, began in '96. It takes place entirely online over the course of 3 days, goes 24 hours a day. We'll talk about that too, the challenges of knowing how much and how little. And there was over 800 participants from around the world. And so, and this is the slide shot. So then we did, they published the list of where these delegates all came from. So I am not a natural scientist, and this is my one step into this area. So the numbers, I mean, I took it from other people publishing and working in this area, but for sure it should be redone, and using modern figures is, again, quite dated. So we looked at 3 sources of saving: the air travel, the ground transportation, and the hotel use. And you might wonder about the hotel use, because the hotel is going to be heated anyways, but the fact is the person's house in Canada or wherever they came from is still being heated while they're occupying this room, so we added that too. And so we took the taxi fare to the nearest airport, the return airfare to Heathrow, 3 nights accommodation in London, and the conference registration. This is estimating the money cost, not the carbon cost, just the money cost. And in here, you see that the average cost way back in 2008 was $2,505.05. So that's a lot of money for some people. For other people on big expense accounts, maybe it's not so much. But and those are real dollars, U.S. dollars. But this is maybe more interesting, is the carbon footprint. We figured that they saved, that the average, if you counted all the ones who drove to London as well, didn't have any air flight, they would have about 1.79 tons of CO2 had been saved. But if they flew, it would be 2.21. And then it's hard to say, well, that's just a number. Is it a lot, or is it a little, or how do we put this in your mind? And so I gathered these data again from, what was it, 2005. This was what the consumption was. And the next slide just zooms it up a little bit. So you get it in a Western perspective. It says the United States, they burn almost 20 tons per year. And so it's about 1/10 of their annual consumption. This shows Canada as being lower, and I always thought we were the highest energy consumers in the world, but in any case, nothing to be proud about. And you can see the UK, where they travel much less and the weather's more mild, they're less too. So it's a significant amount of carbon that's expended every time you go on an international conference like that. So just basically ending, 7 reasons, I just grabbed these this morning of the different virtual conferences that are around. There's different companies now. There's lessons learned. There's prognostics and blog postings about how virtual conferences are going to save the world. Well, I'll get to that. It's similar to a MOOC, and most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with massive open online courses. But if you think of the economy and the learning that happens in a MOOC, they might have 1,000, 2,000, 30,000 students registered in this. Not all of them will complete assignments. Not all of them will finish. Some of them won't even start. But nonetheless, if you talk about the people who finish, it can be a very large number of people, and then they're moving more and more to having them continuous enrollment, so they can reuse the same content over and over and over again. And of course, the University of Alberta has been quite famous on their Mountains 101 and dinosaurs and all these other MOOCs that they've done. So I think if you were to ask a student, is the MOOC the same as taking the course face-to-face? Well, they would probably say, no, it's not the same. Is it as good? They might say, no, it's not as good either. But how much did it cost you? And what time commitment did you have? And so you can see that, and is it scalable? And so the virtual conference meets all of those criteria in an order of magnitude or more higher than a face-to-face. What it loses, of course, is networking and good times and the chance to collegially share things with colleagues, get opportunities that you might save up all year waiting to talk to this person or that person. It does become a little self-fulfilling, though, because you get hyped and you go there with all sorts of energy and questions and expectations of meeting somebody. If you weren't going to go to that conference, then maybe you would shift those expectations into a Skype call or a discussion on a threaded news list or Facebook or something like that. So let me just conclude by talking about the pros and the cons. Very significant gains in carbon reduction, cost. Oh, and I was talking about the cost to the participants, but then the cost to the organizer is equally great. You know, like the logistics, they have whole companies who do conference facilitation and guide telling people where to go, and you know, all the reception staff, and it goes on and on and on. They can become very expensive. The cost and time for the organizer, and the convenience for participants and for participants. People can, you know, you can deliver it from Calgary or Australia or wherever you happen to be going from. The challenges, challenge to engage and retain participants both in real time or extended time. So it's what we find is that they register if it's a continuous 8-hour-a-day conference, online virtual conference, very few people will participate for 8 hours. They'll do it at lunch hour, they'll go in the morning, or they'll cherry pick one session. Whereas if they had flown on an airplane to a big city, most of them, or many of them, would stay for the whole 8 hours. And so they're putting more into it. It's sort of more motivating, there's more inbuilt motivation for it. And then the challenges of continuous partial attention. The fact that I can participate in the virtual conference while marking my student's thesis, or you know, doing all the kinds of multitasking that we do. And I mean, that used to be, and maybe it is, worse for virtual conferences, but you sure see that in face-to-face conferences too, where everyone's on their twittering and doing all sorts of things while they're in real time. So continuous partial attention is real, and it is detrimental to you know, exclusive focusing. But again, it's not alone in virtual conferences. And the reductions in networking benefits, the chance to meet a friend of a friend, or to overhear something, or to see somebody who asks a question and that you be able to follow up on that question. I mean, a lot of times you potentially could follow up if there's a list of the participants, but if you don't get that sort of magic moment when there's a coffee break and you're walking out together, you may never talk to that person. And then, of course, a lot of academics, they choose their conferences based on the location of it because they want to have a holiday and they want to bring the wife and they want to do this and they want to do that. So there's a reduction in the kind of cultural enrichment that comes from travel. So conclusions, it saves time, it saves money, it saves the environment, and it just doesn't have to be as good as to be a really good thing. So thank you.
So, I'd like to thank you, Terry. Thank you for that, and thank you for bringing your experience to our experiments here and something like that. I've actually been thinking a lot about this issue of partial attention and how it applies to all sorts of things, because as you mentioned, when I go to a face-to-face conference, I've got my laptop, I'm answering email, like anything like that. Anything else, and it's you know, I think we're all having to learn how to manage our attention differently and how to choose to close down and pay attention, and perhaps we need to think about ways in which we can ask people to commit to attending at some levels. So this is the end of day 3, and I just want to say something about what's going to happen tomorrow. The topic for tomorrow is sustainability and the public. We have a fabulous speaker list. starting at 4 p.m. Mountain Time, where we're going to have Ken Hiltner, Peter Kalmus, so from UC Santa Barbara. Ken Hiltner has helped organize with colleagues the Nearly Carbon Neutral Conference. We're going to have Peter Kalmus from NASA, climate scientist, and Andrew Glover from RMIT in Melbourne. So it's going to be a fabulous first panel from 4 to 5, and then from 5 to 6, we're going to have colleagues from Western Sydney University in Australia. So we're going to have a roundtable discussion there on living labs, resilient cities, and repair culture, which I'm looking forward to. So for all of you who have been tuning in, or for all of you who are going to listen to this in the future, thank you very much, and please join us tomorrow. Remember, tomorrow we're at 4 Mountain Time, not the usual 11 or 12. Thank you very much.